sound effects for Colin, and Diane, you're going to do the sound effects for Ryan. It's really fun. You're going to do the last one. Here's the scene. Colin is the Scottish owner.
In 1986, the Bowen family settled into an aging colonial in the quiet town of Pill, Massachusetts. Frank Bowen, a widower, tried to keep a calm household for his two daughters, 16-year-old Tina and 9-year-old Karen, as they adjusted to life after their mother's death. At first, the house felt like a fresh start, but small oddities began to chip away at that sense of safety. Faint tapping inside the walls, lights that flickered or came on by themselves, and the occasional item nudged slightly out of place. They blamed the quirks of an old house until the disturbances grew harder to explain. One evening, Tina and Karen, more curious than afraid, set up a Ouija board. The mood was light at first, laughter filling the room, until the planchette moved and, not long after, 3 sharp knocks sounded from somewhere behind the plaster. What had felt like harmless creaks now carried a deliberate, watching quality. Over the following weeks, the strange occurrences multiplied. Objects vanished, the television would switch on in the middle of the night, and Frank began to feel as though someone were present, even when the house appeared empty. The family's worst fear became real the night Frank returned to find the house plunged into an unnatural chill. Radios screamed with static, and the TV glowed with nothing but snow. As he climbed the stairwell, he came face to face with a sight no parent expects. A teenage boy standing in the hallway, dressed in a wig and a wedding gown, makeup smeared across his face, a hatchet clutched in his hand. It was Daniel Lant, a stranger who had been living inside the home's hidden spaces. Lant had slipped into the house months earlier and carved out a life inside its cavities. He moved through crawl spaces and gaps behind the walls, installing crude peepholes and hiding in narrow voids to watch the family. The tapping, the missing items, the sensation of being observed, all traced back to him. Terrified, Frank grabbed his daughters and fled, calling the police. Officers later discovered Lant crouched inside a cramped wall cavity, surrounded by makeshift bedding, discarded food wrappers, and tunnels carved through the insulation and studs. There were clear signs he had been spying on the family for an extended period. Lant was arrested and briefly released on bail. Not long after, he broke into another residence and committed a horrific crime, murdering a pregnant woman and her 2 children. He was ultimately convicted and given a life sentence. The Bowens never returned to the house. The place that promised a fresh start became for them a sealed and painful memory. In 2013, a worn rental house near the Ohio State campus became home to 10 students who were drawn to the low rent and spare charm of an older property. The place had the kind of quirks common to student housing: flickering lights, temperamental wiring, and the odd, unexplained noise. So initial oddities were shrugged off. But one tenant, Brett, began to notice small, creeping signs that something was off. Cupboards left ajar, groceries disappearing faster than expected, and lights coming on when nobody remembered switching them. The basement held a locked door marked utility closet that the landlord insisted wasn't anything to worry about. Then, one night after a power surge, Brett went downstairs to flip the breaker. Rounding a corner, he froze. A barefoot man was coming out of the basement, moving with the calm, unbothered air of someone who belonged there. When Brett asked who he was, the man, calling himself Jeremy, simply nodded and walked away. Suspicious, Brett and the other housemates forced the padlocked door and discovered a startling scene: a tiny, improvised living area tucked into the back of the basement. A mattress lay on the floor. personal photographs were tacked to the walls. A guitar rested against a shelf, evidence that someone had been staying there for weeks. Jeremy had apparently retained a copy of the house key from a previous tenant and quietly taken up residence, slipping in and out to use the bathroom and eat without drawing attention. The police were summoned. Jeremy didn't resist and left when asked. No serious charges followed, but the students were shaken. Not long after, another group rented the same house. They assumed the stories were exaggerated until they too encountered strange disturbances. Missing food, the sound of footsteps at night, doors left unsecured. One night, a curious roommate searched the basement and found another person living in the shadows. This man, older and apologetic, gave his name as Jared. Like Jeremy, he'd gained access via a copied key and had been surviving in the house's darker corners. He wasn't aggressive. He apologized and agreed to leave. The repeated intrusions left a scar on the house's reputation. Tenants began to install cameras, double-lock every entry, and avoid the basement altogether. They later learned there was a name for the phenomenon: frogging, when someone secretly inhabits another person's home. And for them, it stopped being a theory and became a lived, unnerving reality. In February 2020, an Oklahoma City homeowner began noticing a string of small, unsettling changes in his house. A cereal box that should have been full was half empty when he checked the pantry. The back door was discovered unlocked one morning, and the thermostat had been reset overnight. At first, he blamed forgetfulness or a prank. But when the oddities continued, he grew uneasy and decided to inspect the one place in the home he rarely entered: the attic. He climbed the ladder, pushed up the hatch, and shone his flashlight into the dim space above. Expecting to find insulation, a nest, or stray debris, he instead saw a mattress laid across the attic floor and a pile of clothing stacked in a corner. A man lay curled up on the mattress, sleeping fitfully and appearing exhausted and unkempt beneath the thin beam of light. Startled and alarmed, the homeowner stepped back and called 911. Concerned the stranger might flee, he stayed near the hatch and, according to some reports, kept the man at gunpoint until officers arrived. When police took over, they discovered how the intruder had gained access. An exterior staircase at the rear of the house led to an old attic door that had not been used in years. The man had climbed in through that door and made himself small in the cramped space between the ceiling and roof. Authorities estimated he had been living in the attic for about a week, surviving on food taken from the pantry and using the bathroom when the homeowner was away. Investigators described the intruder as a transient individual with no known personal connection to the homeowner. He offered little coherent explanation beyond exhaustion and a desperate need for shelter. Because he retreated to the attic whenever someone was home, his presence went unnoticed for several days. The idea that a stranger had been sleeping inches above the living space shocked the homeowner and unsettled neighbors. Police arrested the man and charged him with unlawful entry. There was no violent confrontation, but the psychological impact lingered. The homeowner said the discovery changed how he perceived his own house. The familiar private place suddenly felt vulnerable and exposed. Local coverage of the incident served as a cautionary tale about hidden vulnerabilities in ordinary houses, and community members talked about the importance of checking unused access points and boosting security. In the weeks after the arrest, the homeowner upgraded his exterior locks and sealed the unused attic door. He also installed motion-activated lights, added a monitored alarm system, and positioned cameras at key entry points. Those measures helped restore a sense of safety, though the memory of someone living unnoticed above his head remained vivid. The episode served as a stark reminder that ordinary homes can conceal unexpected threats and that vigilance about home security matters. He recovered. In 1941, in a quiet Denver neighborhood, retired railroad auditor Philip Peters lived alone while his wife was hospitalized. Peters was a man of strict habits, who knew every creak and draft in his aging Victorian home. He took comfort in routine and believed he understood every inch of the house, until someone else learned it first. The intruder, later identified as Theodore Conyers, found the attic crawl space and turned it into shelter. Small and secretive, Conyers moved only when he believed the house was empty. For weeks he survived by pilfering small portions of food and water, slipping back to the cramped darkness of the attic whenever Peters returned. The faint noises he made, scuffing, soft footsteps, were dismissed by Peters as ordinary settling or the house's old timbers working. One evening, Peters returned earlier than expected and heard movement overhead. Investigating, he climbed the stairs and pulled open the attic hatch. The confrontation turned violent. Conyers, startled and desperate, struck the older man with a heavy object, killing him. The murder stunned neighbors. There was no apparent forced entry, and the locked doors made the scene all the more bewildering. Conyers did not flee after the killing. He remained in the same attic, living in the house above his crime. Reporters seized on the grotesque image of a man living in the rafters and dubbed him the Denver Spider-Man, a nickname that fed public horror and fascination. Eventually, renewed reports of noise brought the police back. Officers climbed into the attic and found Conyers, filthy, emaciated, and barely coherent. He confessed to the murder and was later convicted. The Peters house was never again a comfortable home. The case left a deep, lingering fear in the community. The notion that a stranger could exist just inches above a sleeping person, patient and unseen, rewired how neighbors thought about safety. People who had once ignored an unlocked gate began checking doors, sealing unused hatches, and inspecting attics. The story also prompted uncomfortable questions about poverty, mental illness, and the gaps in social care that can push someone to hide inside another person's home. Decades later, the murder of Philip Peters still endures not only as a sensational crime but as a sober warning. Familiar places can conceal unseen dangers, and vigilance about the hidden spaces in our houses is a small defense against a terrifying possibility. A woman living with her 5 children began to notice strange things around the house. She had just finished a long, turbulent relationship and was trying to rebuild a safe life for herself and her 5 children. The South Carolina mother thought she'd finally put the worst behind her when she moved into a modest home and focused on her kids. At first, the house felt ordinary enough, but small, unsettling signs began to appear, and she chalked them up to stress, until those signs escalated into something that could not be ignored. Late at night, she began to notice the ceiling behaving oddly. Nails seemed to push down from above, as if someone were working on the floorboards overhead. Faint scratching and soft thumps echoed through the plaster. She told herself it was just the house settling, or fatigue playing tricks on her. But everyday items started to shift position without explanation, and food began to disappear faster than it should. One morning she woke to find insulation flecks scattered across her bedding. Panic replaced dismissal. Worried, she asked her nephew to inspect the attic. What he discovered changed everything. Tucked into the cramped space beside the heating unit was a crude shelter, a bed made from bundled coats and blankets, a small cluster of personal effects, and, most disturbingly, a vent cut open that looked directly down into the family's bedroom. Evidence suggested whoever occupied the space had been living there for days, maybe weeks, and had been watching the room below. When confronted, the intruder turned out to be her ex, a man with a documented history of volatile behavior. He admitted to having been in the attic and, horrifyingly, to spying on the family through the vent above the mother's bed. Officers found unsanitary items in the crawl space, plastic cups filled with urine and feces, suggesting the man had scarcely left his hideout. He told them he'd been there for more than 2 weeks. Before authorities could place him under arrest, he came down, made a brief apology, and walked away. The experience devastated the family's sense of security. The mother spoke openly about how shattered she felt, knowing someone she had once trusted had spent days living directly over her children's heads, watching them sleep. Though no single violent act occurred that night, the violation was profound. A betrayal that left emotional scars far deeper than any physical damage to the house. She said the fear and mistrust would linger for the rest of her life.